right, please join me in welcoming to the stage Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Managing Director of OneEleven, Bilal Khan.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience. Let me tell you why we're maybe a couple of minutes late. The Prime Minister got some demos on the other side. We're convinced that in another life, he was a venture capitalist. He had so many questions. He was right on point with some of these things, and he really wanted to understand what was going on. I thought that was incredible. Ladies and gentlemen, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau. Woo!
Thank you, Bilal. Thank you for welcoming me here. Thank you for all coming out. I'm really looking forward to what's going to be a great conversation about something that really, really matters to me, which is how we prepare for, brace for, but also build for the future. We know that we're in a time of tremendous transformation, tremendous disruption, and people around the world are feeling anxious because of it. They're seeing traditional jobs disappear, either by going overseas, but more likely being replaced with automation, with computers, with robots, and that's something that is cause for a certain amount of anxiety, not just about people's own careers, but about their kids' future and the world we're growing up in. And I guess any society has a choice to make. Do we brace ourselves and try and protect and prevent the disruption from happening, or do we figure out how to be part of it and succeed through the rapid pace of change? And very obvious to me that Canada is exceptionally well positioned to think intelligently about where we want to go as a country and how we're going to get there. I remember as a kid, I was always really frustrated that every radio I had was, or every radio I saw was made in Japan. And I asked someone, well, why was it made in Japan? And someone explained to me, well, very simply, Japan has almost no natural resources, so they had no choice but to invest in innovation, in knowledge, in making smart technology. Whereas Canada, well, why does that mean Canada can't then? Is it because we have great natural resources that were somehow prevented from being innovative and thoughtful and leading the way? And that really bugged me. And what I understood then and what we're seeing now is the fact that we have extraordinary geography, natural resources, energy resources, have actually helped us be innovative in lots of ways in terms of how we develop those natural resources. But fundamentally, the most important resource we have are Canadians ourselves. People who came here over generations from every corner of the world, who've understood that we are much better off pulling together and figuring things out than fighting with each other, understanding that resilient, creative communities come through diversity, and that mirroring that in our approach to business, to innovation, to success, to community, is actually at the heart of our success. This is something that matters not just for Canada, but for the world. As we see increased migrations, whether it's because of conflict or climate change or resource depletion or what have you, more and more people are going to be moving to places where they weren't before, and there are going to be lots of people struggling with multiple identities and layers of identity. Well, what we do really well in Canada is understand that identities and stories not only layer on top of each other in a positive way, but enhance each other's way of thinking. If you put 30 people who have exactly the same background, exactly the same story in a room and get them to solve a very difficult problem, they're going to take a lot longer than taking 30 people with totally diverse backgrounds and experiences to solve the same problem. And that, for me, is the advantage of Canada. We're not the biggest country in the world. We're not We can't simply horsepower our way through to leading the world. We have to do it by getting the very best out of our communities, out of our individuals, out of everything we do, like our companies and our startups. And that's the focus that I've been so excited about over the past year and a half as I've taken on more responsibilities for helping us shape our future together. And that's where investing in innovation, not innovation just simply looking at investing in innovative companies, but investing in people as a driver of innovation, whether it's education, skills development, learning, whether it's research, science, technology, whether it's encouraging investments in infrastructure that are going to lead to both high-tech and the low-tech you need to get to the high-tech. I mean, one of the questions today was, how often do people have to go back and forth from KW to Toronto? And wouldn't it be great if we had better transit links between the two places? I see a lot of heads nodding in this room, and that's the reality, that we have to be thoughtful about all the factors that come together into creating our success. And that's very much what this, the team that we're building together, all of us, to build a better future is very much focused on. So being here to see the creative, challenging, disruptive thinking going on is extraordinarily exciting to me, because I know that, yes, we do have to manage the transition as we go forward into new ways of doing things, new ways of creating businesses, new ways of creating success. But if we get Canadians thinking thoughtfully, responsibly, and in a positive, ambitious way, not just about how we can build success for ourselves, but because we're Canadians, we're always thinking about how we can build success for our neighbors as well. The one thing we've understood in this country is it's not a zero-sum game. We know that when we do well, our neighbors are likely to do well as well. And that impetus and that emphasis is something I've seen very clearly here at OneEleven, and something I know Bilal has been deeply committed to, and something, quite frankly, I'm always getting from someone who's extraordinarily proud about everything that's going on in this part of the city, this part of the country. My friend Adam Vaughan, who's your local MP, and someone who's been telling me about all sorts of great things going on here as well, and thinking very seriously about looking at a crowd like this, seeing a lot of young faces who are exciting and busy in startups. How do we make sure that when comes time to start a family and actually build the next phase of your family life, you get to do it still within walking distance of an amazing workplace, an amazing downtown core like this? And those questions are ones that maybe not a lot of people in this room are directly thinking about, but I know some are. But those are the kinds of questions that governments should be very much thinking about, so that we can create an environment, an ecosystem in which you're going to be able to succeed with both quality of life at whatever stage of life you're in, and think about how we're building a better future altogether. Pour moi, le grand défi que nous avons en tant que pays, c'est comment nous pouvons regarder avec confiance, mais avec créativité, tous les défis auxquels on fait face et travailler ensemble pour les résoudre, en comprenant que de travailler ensemble, déjà, c'est un gros avantage sur les autres dans le monde. So working together is always our greatest strength, and that's certainly what I see here at OneEleven, and I'm very, very excited about having a conversation with Bilal and all of you to talk about the things that matter to you. Merci beaucoup.
Incredible, incredible. So this morning, the community started a new channel called Diversity is Our Strength. And I thought that was incredibly beautiful, because everybody on the floor started to introduce themselves, not what company they came from, what role they played, but what country they came from, and how they got here, and why Canada is so beautiful. Now, of course, in a very Canadian way, that turned into restaurant recommendations, and everyone's like, okay, you're from Portugal, what's the best Portuguese restaurant? And so we've got this great database now, it's fantastic. Prime Minister, I want to kind of frame this conversation a little bit. We're at a Scaleup innovation hub. This ecosystem has evolved over the last 10 years. We've gone from how do we get young people, how do we get people to think about, not going into the traditional paths and starting a company, to we've now got repeat entrepreneurs. We've got kind of third, fourth wave of entrepreneurs that are willing to go big, are willing to kind of really invest in something significant and go global, which is why we think, focus around scaling companies is incredibly important. Every founder in this company and their teams are thinking about really 3 key verticals as it relates to scaling any single company: access to capital, access to talent, and access to customers and revenue. And that's really at its core what a lot of these companies are thinking about. So I want to kind of talk about each of those verticals, starting with access to capital. It would be crazy for me not to celebrate OMERS Ventures just raised their 3rd fund, $300 million. This puts OMERS Ventures at about $800 million of assets under management. As a pension fund, it was transformational. The fact that OMERS took a very small percentage of their entire capital base and used it to invest directly into the innovation ecosystem was transformational for this ecosystem. Suddenly there were deep pools of capital that entrepreneurs here were able to actually get access to. How do we get more of that? I mean, the world is looking to us now. We've got world-class pension funds. Those pension funds, much like your brilliant move recently to build an infrastructure bank, was really around how do we leverage what we have here to bring in foreign capital? How do we do that on the innovation side of things?
Well, I think one of the first things to recognize is, even before we get into the 3 verticals that you want to talk about, is the challenge that we've faced in Canada. We've always had brilliant entrepreneurs, great startups, great ideas who've launched great things, and then they reach this moment where some big American company usually is willing to offer them $100 million or whatever it is, buy them out, and take the company south to Silicon Valley, and that's it. And that's been the story of so many companies in this country, of so many brilliant minds that have been poached by south of the border over so many years. That question is not how can we create great innovative solutions, because we've always done that. We did that in our contributions to NASA over many decades. We've always had top quality problem solvers and engineers in Canada. We just haven't had the ecosystem in Canada or the confidence or the capacity to actually do anything more than be sort of a branch economy of the bigger economy that is immediately to our south and that is just so able to absorb so much great talent. So we've had to, and we struggled over the past while to say, okay, how do we create Canadian platforms? How do we make sure that we're actually driving that success right now? And you've obviously identified sort of 3 of the big elements. And of the 3 of them, I don't think capital or access to capital is a particularly huge challenge. There is lots of capital out there. The challenge is drawing it in the right ways to be able to create homegrown success here at Canada and and allow it to scale up. And part of that is Canadians haven't always been great at tooting our own horn, and we're also extraordinarily adaptable. Canadians do well when you plonk them down in London or Paris, when you move them to California, when they're in New York City, when they're in Singapore or Dubai. Canadians do well. So it's always been very easy to sort of pull great Canadians out there around the world. We have 3 or 4 million Canadians living and working everywhere around the world. It's a great strength of ours. But we need to start doing a better job of tooting our own horn and drawing capital in here to Canada and creating and recognizing the extraordinary ecosystem that we have here that we haven't done a good enough job of selling. I mean, one of the things that I've seen over the past year or so is there is an interest and excitement in Canada on the world stage, and a lot of it seems to center around sort of the political dynamics, and I'm happy to point that out. But it's much more, for me, a reflection of what Canada's been quietly doing and succeeding at for many, many years. It's the extraordinary work that Canadians have been doing. So when I talk to global investors, whether it's convincing a company like Thomson Reuters to come home to Toronto, whether it's getting GE GE to invest in Welland, whether it's to getting a big auto company like GM to invest engineers in Markham for self-driving cars and the new wave of technologies. The conversations we have is, what is global capital looking for now? One of the things they're looking for is stability for the long term. And when you see the challenges in developing economies, the risks associated with many of them, when you look at some of the political challenges, whether it's openness to diversity and immigration, or whether it's just reflecting what countries have great economic stability, fiscal stability, social stability, political stability, a resilience to climate change, a modern approach to values-based ambition that Canadians do so well, Canada suddenly becomes a very, very interesting place. Add on to it access to markets, which I know you're going to talk about later, but south of the United States, across the Atlantic to Europe, especially with the new free trade deal we've signed, the deep ties with Asia that are growing and building on. There is really an exciting moment for Canada right now that, for me, it's just all about getting people to notice, getting people to want to be part of, instead of wanting to suck away from. It's not like, oh, we found this great engineer, but he's stuck in Canada. Let's save him by bringing him down to Silicon Valley. Instead, it's like, oh my God, we found a great group of young engineers. Let's send people to join her. Let's send people to capture some of the exciting things that are going on in Canada right now. And I think we're reaching that critical mass. There's still lots of challenges out there and access to capital. But I think we've reached a moment where the world is really noticing us. Not because of me, but because of you.
I think you're doing a great job as an ambassador. You teed this up really nicely for kind of some of the talent conversations that are happening out there. We talk a lot about bringing talent here, and I think we're doing an incredible job, and the world is now, we've opened our doors to the world, and people are coming in droves. But what I want to talk a little bit about is the talent issue, and you talked about it briefly in terms of the brain drain. And this idea, not just about the talent, but really specifically tied to the intellectual property. And how do we ensure that, there's this raging debate right now, a big multinational from the US just came into Toronto, set up a lab, and got one of our top professors to run that lab. And so what happens with that intellectual property? How do we ensure that we keep it here and that we continue to kind of prosper from it, especially when we think about the implications of that 15, 20, 50 years out versus kind of some of the short-term implications of just creating jobs in the short term?
Yeah, it's a question that we cannot answer with the old models. That's the problem. I mean, so much of patent law and intellectual property was based around very physical items that you could prevent if you were creating them or controlling it in Canada. There was no way someone was going to take advantage of it in Brazil. There was an ability to control production and product in a way that just doesn't make sense the same way anymore. So I'm just the schlep who runs the country. I don't profess to know everything about how we need to create the solutions, but I do know we need to find a new balance. We need to find a way of valuing the extraordinary work that creators do, making sure that others have access to being able to draw and leapfrog and build upon the great work of creators. We need to make sure that there are rewards for people taking the risks around innovation and investing the significant amounts of money in talent and sometimes in infrastructure that's going to lead to these breakthroughs, while at the same time understanding that sharing knowledge is an exponential multiplier of creating solutions. I don't know exactly what the perfect balance is on that. I do know that it's something that a lot of very smart people around the world are struggling with. I think there are places that skew one way or the other more aggressively than Canada. And I think one of the great things that Canada can do is watch and learn and figure it out, and also not not be the Boy Scouts we tend to be in so many cases. We're always quicker to follow the rules and be nice, and tend to take people at the word when they say, of course we all follow the rules, when sometimes we're the only ones following a set of rules that aren't even that clear in the first place.
Yeah, listen, I think it's so important what you just mentioned right there is this idea of the world is changing, and it's changing incredibly quickly. And so agile policy development is incredibly important to be able to move quickly, to be able to understand what's happening, react, scale those things that work really well, and kill those things that don't.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Agile policy development. You obviously haven't watched Question Period any time lately. I would love to be able to have an agile policy development going on. But the fact is, no matter how efficient or effective governments are, we're always going to be playing catch up to where the leading actors, the leading thinkers, the leading edge of innovation is going on. So for me, yes, absolutely, we need to be a little more responsive and agile, but we're also going to have to be more thoughtful and open in the systems we create, even as legislators. We're going to have to build things that aren't quite as prescriptive, much more based around the spirit and intent of the approach, the legislation, the frame we're trying to build on, to allow for that sort of figuring things out. And quite frankly, I don't know where we're going to be 30 years from now, let alone 50 years from now, on intellectual property. I do know that folks like I see in this room right now are going to be not just figuring it out, but defining where that is. So from my perspective, it's how can we make sure that people are succeeding, people are able to do what they love, and get those solutions they're creating out to the world at large, the community at large, find customers for the ideas and the solutions they're putting forward, and trust that we can create a fair system that will adapt and reward people who have great ideas without leaving it for the big conglomerates who suck everything up and suck out the value of the creative people, as has happened too often in the past, whether you talk about various performance industries or what have you.
I think we need more engineers and computer scientists running for public office. That's what really needs to happen. We'll get some real agile development going on up there.
I don't know. Politics is an art as much as a science.
It's true. It's true. I want to open
but
it
yes,
up.
more engineers and smart people in politics, absolutely.
Yeah,
a few less lawyers and a few more engineers would be wonderful for me.
Absolutely. Good catch. I want to open this up to the audience, because we've got an incredible group of people here who have some really bright questions, who are living it on a day-to-day basis. They're in the trenches, they're hustling, they're struggling. We're going to take it by hands. We've got mics. We've got mic runners. Give me a hand. The mic will catch you. We've got a lady right over here. If we can, I think that's Nudge. Nudge is representing.
Hi, yes. My name is Manik. I work at Nudge. My question is really around the fact that when we talk about tech and innovation, we're focused on Toronto, KW, these major urban centers. And I wonder if we're kind of at the risk of really focusing our growth in these silos and not really spreading it across the country the way that we could be doing. So my question is really, how do we ensure we don't do that and really try to spread out the growth across Canada?
That's a great question, and it's a question that Canada has struggled with over the course of its history. I mean, we know that urban centers, and actually modern civilization, recognize that urban centers are great drivers of economic growth and opportunity. But that we depend and we rely on in Canada, we're certainly defined by the scale and scope of our geography, and we cannot leave aside our smaller communities. One of the things and one of the areas where we are doing so much innovation and put so much emphasis on, to the surprise of many, in Budget 2017, is agriculture, agri-foods, agri-innovation that is recognizing that there's a lot of things cities can do, and despite a few farms on rooftops downtown, you're not going to be able to get the food production that you're going to need to support our cities unless we are being extraordinarily innovative in our agriculture. I was a few weeks ago on a canola farm in Saskatchewan, where the farmer was extremely proud, and rightly so, of the technology in his sprayer that is linked to GPS. That allows you to sort of go back and forth across the field, and then individual nozzles will turn off so they don't overspray based on GPS, as he drives across the field, which is great. But then he pointed out, yes, we've got the GPS, which is satellite-based, but a lot of our, cutting-edge technology is actually mobile-based and cell-based. So we need more cell towers out here. And of course, I'm looking around, and there's like one house over there and one house way over there, and there's just not the density you'd imagine as being important for cell signals. And we were dropping on our smartphones. But how we think about making sure that the entire country is properly connected is really important. I remember a story of a young man I met in the Gaspé who was saying that he was working for a video game company. I'm like, that's great. He says, well, yes, actually, I went to high school here in my town. I went to college down the road. I went to university in Quebec City, and then I got hired by a big Disney-affiliated gaming company in Montreal. I'm like, okay, that's sort of a standard story of the move from a rural space to an urban space. And he said, yes, but then after 2 years with them, they've allowed me to move back home, and I now do all my design and programming from the family farm here in rural Gaspé. And that's great, except we know what's going to happen in a few years of, no matter how connected he is through technology to the rest of the community, not having the kind of clustering that you're facing here, where you're challenged over the cafeteria by someone in a completely different area who is pushing you in this way or that way, not having the dynamic environment to be able to think differently about things, not having the diversity of views and perspectives is going to be, just because there's not that many views and perspectives around, is going to be a challenge. So we have to figure out how to get that balance right and understand that people are going to move here and there, that you generate success in our cities, and yes, it will have impacts and trickle down out and spread out across the country, but can we also create microclusters in smaller communities? Moncton has become a hub for a particular level of innovation around cyber security. There are little communities that are doing extraordinary things, and how we think about geography being less and less of a barrier and more incidental to people's success is, I think, the trend line we need to move on, because people are looking for a quality of life that sometimes you can get in the center of a great city with all the great restaurants, as you point out, around you, but sometimes you get it when you're in the woods with a beautiful quiet lake and no rush hour to deal with one way or another. And getting that balance right is something I think all Canadians are conscious of trying to figure out.
Great. How about someone on this side over here? We can, why don't we go right to Hockey Stick over here? Raymond?
Hi, Raymond Look, founder of Hockey Stick. We were very proud a couple of weeks ago to announce a national scale-up data platform with partnership with the Lazaridis Institute. Minister Chagar was there to make the announcement. My question is about people. You mentioned that Canada is a place that people want to go. I think it's great. And we tend to focus in the tech community about the startup visa, skilled workers, engineers, but what about their families? What is your position on helping those entrepreneurs and engineers bring their families to Canada? And they're going to be older, some of them will be sick. I keep hearing this phrase about burdens on Canadian society, but also I don't think any of us here could start and run a company without our families.
No, listen, Raymond, that's a great question, and it's traditionally been one of the advantages that Canada has had when a high potential individual, an engineer, someone who's has an opportunity to move and is picking between the UK or the US, Canada, Australia, a range of countries that they might want to move to. The fact that Canada was one of those countries that says, yeah, and you can bring your parents and you can bring your your husband right away, and you can bring family with you. Family reunification programs is a big driver of success, and I certainly have always disagreed with the previous government that highlighted that older parents can be a burden on society. We all know how important community is. We all know how important it is to be able to have that support systems, because we're working so incredibly hard. I mean, I certainly go through this with the challenge that I face just balancing work and family in my own life, and it's the story of our generation as well. So recognizing that family reunification is really, really important, we've made more investments in it. But at the same time, there's always going to be a matter of trade-offs to make in terms of immigration. We're going to bring in a certain number of refugees, a certain member of families, a certain member of innovators and economic class. And the overall thing to preserve for me is the collective confidence we have as Canadians in our immigration system. Because where you look at countries that have become fearful and closed off in terms of immigration, it's not necessarily because it wasn't generated by political decision-making. Politicians and populism and nationalism is a response to anxiety that people can no longer create successful immigration systems and paths. So for me, ensuring that, as the story of Canada has been, that successive generations come to this country and rapidly succeed and build success for themselves and their communities is the most precious thing that we have to protect. If there becomes a sense that immigration is no longer contributing to the well-being of our communities, of our economies, then support begins to slip away. So how, and I'm trying to figure out and maximize how many people we can bring in every year to a maximal number and give them the tools and the path to succeed in a reasonably rapid way. I mean, we know that refugees fleeing a war-torn country like Syria are going to take, in some cases, a little longer to succeed than someone just graduating from a university in Mumbai, in many cases. But we need to be able to have that mix that is going to give people paths to success, because we've already figured out one of the huge barriers to immigration around the world, in that a typical Canadian is defined by shared values, not by any single identity. So that advantage we have of recognizing that a typical Canadian can look like anyone from any part of the world is, I mean, we don't give ourselves enough credit for what that actually means in terms of our ability to grow and create diversity as a strength. But we also, the other part of it is we have to give people pathways to success. My second favorite Prime Minister, Wilfrid Laurier, presided over the largest wave of immigration ever to this country. And it was in the early 20th century as we settled the prairies. And what was necessary for that to succeed as it did was the railroads, the grain elevators, the land that was available so that people who came here could build their success with their drive to do just that. What we have to make sure we're figuring out now in the 21st century, what are the railroads and grain elevators and land of the 21st century? Obviously, it's education, it's language acquisition, it's STEM abilities, it's openness to the values that define and drive Canadian society, openness, willingness to work hard, desire to be there for each other, compassion, generosity, a search for justice, for opportunities for all. These are the things that we have going for us in immigration, and those are the things we're going to keep building on.
Absolutely. Diversity is our strength. I love that. It's absolutely fantastic. We're going to take a question from this side here. Razor, you want to take mic? Here. You got a mic over here?
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. So this past July, you were speaking, we were at an event called The Dock. It was in Muskoka. It was a group of big company CEOs and startup CEOs, and you were having a similar conversation. And then you dropped this little analogy. You said that the part of the country where most Canadians live, 2 hours north of the U.S. border, if we had the same density as the Netherlands in that part of the country, we could support 100 million Canadians. And that inspired that whole dinner conversation that night. Everyone was talking about this concept of 100 million Canadians. And then since then, Brexit happens. And then Trump happens. And this vision that you shared, the world has changed, right? Canada is the world's best at immigration. We're the world's best at integration. How do we make that 100 million Canadian reality? How do we take advantage of this unique moment in time?
I'll admit it was more of a thought experiment than it was an actual policy plan. But it is the point. If you imagine the population density of the Netherlands, which has a nice mix of cities and farmlands and some forests, and apply that population density to the southern 10% of Canada, you'd have 400 million people living in this country, which is more a reflection of just how big Canada actually is than anything else. So there is certainly technically room for more people in Canada, but the challenge is what I just laid out. How many people can we lead to success, and at what pace? And we have to figure out how to integrate people successfully with their families, to get them to understand the rules and the values that are our shared public values in this country. I mean, people come from countries where there are huge different cultural, religious, social traditions, and there is going to be an adjustment period. And Canadians have learned to be patient. We haven't always been patient. We have, lessons learned from the Japanese internment camps to the Komagata Maru to the St. Louis to all sorts of, black marks on our history to our shameful treatment of Indigenous Canadians over centuries that we're now just starting to grapple with and turn around. We need to learn from that, and we need to move forward in a respectful, responsible, and reasonable way. I would love to be able to be even more open and more welcoming than we are. I just know that one of the most precious things I have as compared to my colleague world leaders on the stage is a population that is fundamentally positively inclined towards immigration. And our capacity and our responsibility as a government to protect that, to enhance that, and to share it with the world so that other countries can understand that openness is a source of strength, is the path we need to be on. So, there's a lot of work to do before, like I said, we actually get in place the grain elevators and railroads that we're going to need to, expand immigration in any significant way in the short term anyway. But it's a thought we certainly can have about, the long-term future of Canada.
Yeah, I think we've got time for one more question. My back has been facing this side. I apologize. Let's get some love over here. Why don't we go to the front right here? Yeah, why don't Altus?
Thank you again for coming down and talking to us, Prime Minister. I wanted to push you a little bit on funding and capital. I know Bilal said that was one of the three areas. As a tech startup, we benefit from SHRED, we benefit from FedDev programs, we benefit from IRAP. One thing that we noticed in the last couple months is that IRAP was cut back and clawed back quite substantially. I'm just wondering, is that part of a larger plan? Do you have something that's going to replace it? What should we be looking forward to?
Well, just in your explanation, an alphabet soup version of all the different sources of funding you benefit from, we're highlighting one of the problems, is that there have been a lot of different pathways to accessing funding and support from the federal government. You add on to provincial advantages and the amount of overlap or gaps that are created with a sort of a very complex universe of support and funding is a real challenge. It rewards people who are very good and clever at working through political systems and structures, when I would like to think that most of the employees in a startup are focusing on how to create that better mousetrap they're building, rather than how do you navigate the Granting Council's requirements for getting through. So one of the things our Minister of Innovation, Navdeep Bains, has been focused on is how do we consolidate? How do we pull things together in a way that is going to make it simpler, that is going to have built into it the kind of flexibility that's going to respond to the real needs that are out there, reward success, not reward effectiveness in filling out forms, and create pathways to shift our support for successful companies, boosting their innovation, to supporting more and more Canadians in their driving for innovation. You don't have a department designated for filling out government applications. We want to reward you and make it easier because you've got a great model or a great thinking on that. A lot of that should rely on great spaces like OneEleven, on folks like the folks at OMERS and other pension funds who are out there seeing what kinds of solutions are out there, because I don't know that government bureaucrats are always the best people to be evaluating what exactly your project is and whether it deserves funding or something, funding or not, and how we align with people who are already, whether it's academic institutions like Ryerson or others, how we create the kind of pools of capital that will fill gaps for areas that deserve to be funded but aren't having as much ease in getting the funding from traditional VC pathways. That's, I think, something that a government that has a different investment perspective than your typical VC or even angel investor, how can we make sure that we're encouraging those people for whom access to capital is otherwise difficult? Other senses, how can we make sure that we're investing in ways that is leveraging significantly more private capital? I mean, I made an announcement in Windsor a few months ago where $100 million of government money was leveraging billions of dollars of the company's money in terms of jobs, in terms of innovation, in terms of things. So these are the kinds of things that government needs to think about how we can do in a thoughtful, responsible way, and just having a better vue d'ensemble, a better whole view of where we're funding and how money is flowing out the door in a more thoughtful and independent way is very much what we're doing. But this government understands how essential it is to be investing in Canadians and in creative, innovative ideas if we're going to compete successfully on the world stage.
Absolutely. I want to wrap this incredible session up. I mean, really insightful, with kind of two final thoughts. One is just how great it's been to see a prime minister lean into this particular industry, this particular sector, the way that you have. And let me just kind of give a very quick point on this. This is not kind of because he's the Prime Minister of Canada. Before the Prime Minister became the Prime Minister, he visited OneEleven right after we launched our first base. And he came on his own accord, and he was there to learn about what was happening and what was really kind of growing in this space, and how do we help scale companies, how do we help start companies. Since then, you've just you've taken this sector and really kind of showcased it to the rest of the world. You've done some incredible work on that front, and for that, we're incredibly appreciative for recognizing that this is the future of Canada, and that the people and the talent is really what's going to drive this agenda forward. The second kind of final point I'll make is, and this, stick with me for a second here. I walked in to OneEleven this morning, and I can't tell you how amazed I was when I was walking around the floor, for a few reasons. First of all, there was an energy and there was a buzz that the Prime Minister was coming. Secondly, I couldn't even recognize anybody because everybody was so dressed up. Suits and ties and nice dresses.
You sure that wasn't the
and heels.
RCMP guys wandering around? They would have come
I'm
through
certain.
too.
And I'm thinking to myself, guys, we're supposed to be authentic. This is supposed to be an
Like
innovation
hoodies,
hub.
right where the hoodies and sneakers.
The hoodies and the sneakers, and you're walking around, and usually you smell like really weird smells on the floor, and now you're smelling like perfumes and colognes. But let me tell you why I bring that up, and it's because you really have brought the best out of this particular country, and I mean that with the greatest degree of sincerity. The moment you came into the office and went out to the rest of the world to tell everybody who we are and what we're doing, talk about what our values are, what our strengths are, I can say with a great degree of certainty as it relates to me and my family, but I think I can speak on behalf of many in this room, that we are grateful to you for all the work that you're doing. We are proud to be Canadians. I think we're prouder today than we've ever been. At least I was born and raised here for as long as I can remember. And just know that this particular group is here to back you as you go out to the rest of the world to do all the incredible work that you're doing.
Thank you, and it's very kind of you to say, but I mean, I think I have a bit of a confession to make. The ideas
There's media here, by the way.
with which I govern, the principles that drive me, the values I hold, are ones that I learned from Canadians. The conversations I've been lucky to have through the course of my life with people who are thinking about either when I was young, the impact my father had on this country, but also, talking with the Trudeau gets people thinking about the future of this country and the stories of this country and how we shape our future. And all my life, I've been able to have conversations with people who were imagining what a better country could look like if only we had politics that did a slightly better job of embodying our shared values and hopes and dreams, and not be as much of a source for division and cynicism. So, the number of people who said to me, it'd be great to see politics be this way or that way. We know it's not going to happen because politics can't be that way. And I sort of said, well, why can't it be that way? And I ran what some originally called a hopelessly naive campaign that was focused on pulling people together and not attacking my opponents and not trying to look for wedge issues or regional advantages. And I did that with a high degree of confidence because I was raised in a way that allowed me to know Canadians and know that of which we individually and collectively are capable. And if you like generally, because nobody agrees with everything I do, it would be terribly boring, but if you generally feel that this government is reflective of your approach to this country and this world, it's because it is. It's because it's based on people's desires to have a thoughtful, responsible, reasonable, balanced approach to doing the right thing for the long term, not just the short term. And that's because that's who Canadians are. So thank you for everything you do to encourage me and to teach me and to shape me into the kind of government I hope we all collectively want. Merci.
So everybody in this room will appreciate this. For all the work that you're doing, we have a small token of our appreciation. It's a ping pong table. It's a ping pong racket. We've got a really intense ping pong culture at OneEleven, I think within the tech ecosystem here. And we thought that this would just be a small token of our appreciation. We've engraved it with OneEleven so you remember this visit. And we hope to see you again very, very soon.
Thank you, Bilal.
Oh, we'll just do a little.
There we go, yeah.